Guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Tuesday, December 26th, 2023, and today we're going to be talking about the 2024 presidential election and the role of President Obama in helping Democrats secure yet again another presidential election victory against President Donald Trump in just less than a year. So President Obama has been quite involved in Democratic politics since he left office. Leaving office, he was much more involved in the Hillary Clinton campaign and did a lot of advocacy and campaign work for her back in 2016. But obviously that wasn't something that worked out to be as stellar of a result as Democrats would have hoped. But going into 2018 and 2020 and then 2022, Democrats also knew to utilize the power of the most recent Democratic president besides President Biden and the popularity that he left with him when he was outgoing in January of 2017. Now, President Obama has been also just an active figure in general in terms of advocating for the Affordable Care Act and making sure that his legacy continues to stay on. He's visited the White House quite a few times to advocate for initiatives that he passed and championed when he was in office. But elections are very different than playing politics to keep your legacy and your, the powers of your former administration in check and in line. I think looking at President Obama for 2024, Democrats are very hopeful that he will provide a benefit to President Biden and boost them in the way that he did for Democrats back in 2022 and how he did for Biden in 2020. And most recently, President Obama has been involved in grassroots organizing and fundraising for President Biden, raising $4 million for him going into the end of this quarter. The Biden campaign on track to raise nearly $100 million by the end of the quarter. In total, over $100 million across this year going into 2024. With a non-competitive primary, Democrats are doing well financially, partly in response to a number of things that have been happening across the country, as well as Donald Trump does do amongst Republican primary voters when it comes down to indictments and court proceedings and things along those lines. Democrats also see an influx of donations, and President Obama and the Democrats and Biden capitalize on that to fundraise going into next year. So President Obama, his role isn't as clearly described as some people might have hoped. President Obama, I think realistically, should be very involved in the Rust Belt states where he did very well in 2012. States like Wisconsin where he won by 6, states like Michigan where he won by 10, and states like Pennsylvania where he won by 5 in 2012 for these states that went red 4 years later under President Trump. Now, these are states that President Biden was able to win back in 2020, but the margins were widely expected to be more similar to Obama's victories in 2012 rather than Donald Trump's victories in 2016. But these states are much closer. These states don't love Biden and they don't love Trump. And so they get close every single election cycle, but when prompted with the candidates outside of those two, as I talked about actually earlier in today's video about the Michigan GOP, like Gretchen Whitmer and Tudor Dixon, they have much more clear-cut decisions. Now, looking at these states too, they are going to be more competitive in 2024 than they were in 2022, simply because all sides of the aisle will be putting every single dollar and every single ounce of effort into winning states like Michigan, winning states like Wisconsin, winning states like Pennsylvania. And these are the states where Obama finds his forte. Now, President Obama has been involved in the 2022 midterms, like I said. He boosted Democrats in 22. He visited a bunch of different states, and it was a very beneficial visit. He came to the states like Wisconsin and helped them win the governorship there. He came to states like Pennsylvania, helped them win the governorship and Senate race there. Visited a bunch of battleground states that President Obama had a significant amount of support in back in 2012 and championed and capitalized on that in 2022, giving Democrats a victory. So right before the midterm elections happened, President Obama stopped in Georgia, he stopped in Michigan, he stopped in Wisconsin, Nevada, and Pennsylvania. And the reason and choices for these states are quite clear. And to give a bit of background as to why President Obama is uniquely fitted for those, well, we already know he does very well across the Rust Belt. In 2012, he was able to do phenomenal in comparison to President Biden's performance and Secretary Clinton's performance. But then you take a look at why he would be needed in Nevada. Well, he also won in that state by around 5 points. It's a state that Biden won by 2.4, a state Hillary Clinton also won by 2.4. It was a very competitive state, but one the Democrats were able to hold on to when it came down to the Senate race, which was so exceptionally competitive. But the state of Georgia in specific, you might be wondering, why is he needed there? Georgia is a state where President Obama did not do so well in 2012. He lost the state by around 8 points to Mitt Romney when Hillary Clinton only lost the state by around 5, and President Biden was able to flip it blue. But the reason for President Obama being here was largely because President Obama is still very positively received across minority communities. This is where President Obama and President Biden, despite both being Democrats, find different solid bases in terms of their core support. Of course, President Obama in 2012 did well amongst minority voters, but wasn't able to flip Georgia because the composition of the state at the time was not conducive to a flip. There was not as many minority voters in the state. White voters were still very much locked in on the Republican Party, especially the Atlanta metro area, where you now see Democrats performing very, very well. For example, Cobb County is reliably blue. Fulton County is much more blue. Surrounding areas, DeKalb, Gwinnett, these are Democratic areas because the population is growing and growing and growing, and the voters here are turning and turning and turning. But President Obama, like I said, is very popular amongst minority voters, so he serves a unique benefit of visiting a state like Georgia to drive up turnout specifically amongst the black community. President Obama is still very highly regarded amongst black voters, amongst minority voters in general, Hispanic voters, Asian voters. He does very well. And I think looking at 2012 even, this was a bit of a warning sign for Republicans. Sure, Mitt Romney was able to win, but the margin here was not nearly where it should have been to keep this state red. And by the end of the decade, well, guess what? We know this. It flipped blue. So now President Obama being involved in fundraising is the first of many steps I think the Democratic Party is taking to involve the former president in the 2024 election cycle. What we know here is that the Obama campaign officials are very adamant, besides David Axelrod at least, very adamant that Biden needs to be reelected and that he is the only candidate who can end up winning. Biden's former campaign manager says third-party candidates can't win. We know this, but he's saying this for a reason. He's using his position as a staff or campaign manager for President Obama to tell voters, hey, third-party candidates are not the way to go. They're not electable. They're not going to win. Biden is your guy. And so a large reason why these Obama campaign officials are even getting involved in the first place is because they believe that there might be some calls within the Democratic Party to either one, replace Biden, or two, potentially back an external no labels ticket or a different type of candidate that is unorthodox and in their eyes, quote, could be able to win when Biden can't. And so what we are seeing is a consistent display of support for President Biden to keep the Democratic Party and the left wing, whether that's Green Party candidates or whatever it might be, from running as spoilers in some effect to President Biden to make sure that he has the most electable chance in 2024. There's a reason why candidates like Cornel West, who were originally running on a Green Party ticket, are running now in 2024 as an independent rather than a Green Party ticket, because they know that the Green Party has the means and the money necessary to get on a ballot that could potentially spoil President Biden. And so recently we just saw that Jill Stein just got on the ballot in Arizona. Democrats are now worried that that might serve to the detriment of President Biden, but are still banking on the fact that they have an abortion referendum on the ballot. But this, in many ways, seems to be in a way to involve, in so many different ways, Obama's administration and his influence on the party to keep people from, in some cases, abandoning President Biden. It also doesn't play into the Republican Party's hand that, Obama has traditionally, at least in 2010 and 2014, not taken as much of a hands-on approach in elections where he isn't directly running in. 2012 and 2008 were beautifully orchestrated elections in circumstances that in some cases he might not have been able to do as well. 2008 was an essential landslide for modern-day proportions, winning states like Indiana, coming within a point of Missouri, coming within single digits of North and South Dakota. Now states Donald Trump wins by over 30 points, doing very, very well. 2012 comes around, Mitt Romney has a last-minute surge in the polls right before Election Day, and you see that there starts to be this consideration, okay, is Obama going to lose? He's going to lose Florida for sure, but now is he going to win Ohio? No, he's going to lose Ohio, yada, yada, yada. Obama ends up winning 332 electoral votes. So a lot of different things at play, but Obama knows how to win when he's on the ballot, but when he's not, people have come to this conclusion that President Obama does not campaign to the same extent that he can when he's on the ballot. But I think 2024 is a different story. I think President Obama is very much committed to defeating President Trump. I think he sees 2016 as a complete and total collapse on not only the Democratic Party, but his legacy, because he was the outgoing president and Hillary Clinton, in many ways, was supposed to continue his legacy. And although he was popular, it sort of came at a time frame where you were leaving office and people started to view you more favorably. And that's where you start to see some concern coming in from President Obama. I think he does, in some cases, feel responsible for what happened in the 2016 election. Obviously not in a way that makes him seem like he's blamed for this or that he should be responsible for it, but I do think part of the motivation for Obama's re-entrance into Democratic politics, when he very well could take a sideline approach like President Bush does, or even in some cases President Clinton does, and I get it, they were further in the past, but still politically relevant for sure, they are former presidents. I think part of this too is to ensure that Donald Trump never has another chance at the White House whatsoever. And so in his meeting with Biden saying he would do whatever it takes to help win in 2024, he means it. Whether that's fundraising on a grassroots level, whether that's going out to campaign in states like he did in 2022, President Obama wants to be a tool for the Democratic Party to help them win in 2024, because we know he's concerned. People close to President Obama are telling the press that President Obama is concerned, and he has every right to be. Looking at these general election numbers, if I was a Democratic strategist, I would be concerned, because these numbers are not where Democrats were 4 years ago, 8 years ago, or 12 years ago. These numbers are not a good sign for Democrats as of today. That's why my 2024 election prediction between President Biden and President Trump has President Trump winning if the election was held today. But that's why we have time. That's why Democrats have time. And that's why they're fundraising a lot of money, and that's why they're involving big candidates or big names like President Obama going into 2024 rather than deploying them just now. Because voters are not to be swayed 11 months out from an election. Yes, many of them will already have made up their minds, but that doesn't mean they were swayable 11 months out. Many voters will make this decision in the final 30 days of the campaign, but they will need consistency and they will need strong names backing the top ticket candidates if they are to listen to people besides Trump or Biden. Right now, the Democratic Party is facing a very similar dilemma as they did in 2016, when both sides of the aisle are viewed equally as negatively by independent voters, young voters, etc. The lesser of two evils situation that was not necessarily the case back in 2020. And while many Democrats and many, especially members of the more left-wing part of the party, especially party members that were affiliated with Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, they didn't see Joe Biden as a viable alternative. They thought he would lose in the same way Hillary Clinton did. And so for many of them, it was a lesser of two evils situation. But to the average voter, it wasn't. That is no longer the case. And so when you start to see the 2024 election shaping up to be similar to where it was in 2016, that's where Democrats get very worried. Because in 2016, when both candidates were disapproved of, Donald Trump ended up on top, not Hillary Clinton. And so they don't want that happening again. They want to reshape the narrative, reclaim and reshape the narrative around 2024, around President Biden, and they want to be able to win, obviously. And so that's why they're bringing in these top guns. They're bringing in very, very well-known names. It isn't just Obama who's going to be involved in this race. And Biden has already tapped top Democrats like Gretchen Whitmer to co-chair Biden's 2024 campaign. The extent at which the Biden campaign is going to bring out the cavalry is to the fullest extent, potentially even more than they did in 2020, which seems quite insane. And I think the reason for that too was because there is an increased sense of urgency around this election than there even was back during the COVID-19 pandemic. Whether it's the issues with Donald Trump legally speaking, on the issues of the 14th Amendment, or interference in election, or overturning an election, or insurrection, or classified documents, or hush money, there are more things to rile up the Democratic base now on top of what they already had back in 2020. And so Donald Trump has given the Democratic Party more ammunition and more of a reason to be more involved in this election cycle than they were even in 2020. And very obviously, that is not where the Republican Party wants to be. Because if they lost last time and Democrats put more in this time, there's a strong chance the Democrats could win again. But it will take a lot of moving parts, and President Obama is only one piece to the puzzle. He has a strong, reputable election history that gives him reason to be involved, just as he was in 2022 and in 2020. There are a lot of voters out there that voted for Obama twice and then voted for Donald Trump and then voted for Donald Trump again, who could potentially be swayed by candidates, by people like Obama. And I think that is where we come into his impact, although maybe marginal, because I imagine many voters that have voted for Obama twice, then voted for Trump twice, are not switching back to the Democratic Party. They have moved to a point beyond that and no longer trust Democrats. In the same case, there are plenty of voters out there that were McCain, Romney, then Clinton, Biden, and will never turn back to the GOP again. I'm looking at states like Arizona and Georgia. And so that's circumstances that where you won't see a lot of movement. But in states that are going to be decided not by margins that Obama won by in 2012, not 6 points in Wisconsin, not 10 points in Michigan, certainly not 5 points in Pennsylvania, you are going to find that these few thousands of votes, tens of thousands of votes, can make all the difference, 100%. Because had 44,000 people voted differently in 2020, Republicans would have won the presidency. 44,000 out of 150 million cast. That's how close these elections get. And so when you look at that from that lens and that perspective, there is every reason to have President Obama on the campaign trail, heavily advocating for the Democratic Party, heavily advocating for President Biden. Because like I said, every single part of this election, if Democrats are to win it, will need to work perfectly. And the involvement of President Obama now and over the next 11 months will be crucial in winning over certain sections of voters that might otherwise not be inspired to vote for Biden. It isn't just those voters that voted for Trump twice. It is already, as I mentioned, minority voters that very much like President Obama and under his direction and under his rallying call and under his support could hold their nose and vote for President Biden even if they aren't pleased with either of the two options they have nationally. It's an issue that Hillary Clinton could not successfully overcome in 2016, and now time will tell if President Biden can overcome it in 2024 with all this institutional backing, and chances are we won't find out until Election Day. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 presidential election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.